For 3 years, my life with Anna was the closest thing to peace I'd ever known. I deal with chaos for a living. I'm a lawyer, which means I spend most of my waking hours dissecting lies, diffusing hostility, and watching people tear each other apart over money, pride, or both. By the time I step out of the courtroom, my soul is usually bruised and tired. Coming home to Anna used to be like surfacing from deep water. One long breath of clean air before the next plunge into humanity's ugliness. Anna was a paralegal at my firm when we met. Sharp, ambitious, the kind of woman who didn't just want a career, but a name. She was driven by a quiet fire that I both admired and feared. When she spoke about law, her eyes burned. When she spoke about her future, her words had edges. I fell in love with that determination. In her, I saw a reflection of the person I wanted to be. Not just successful, but purposeful. Together, we built what most people would call a solid life, a restored craftsman home, evenings filled with case files and takeout, laughter echoing through hallways still smelling of fresh paint. She'd sit on the couch with her laptop, reviewing notes, while I'd pore over depositions at the dining table. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. It felt real, like we were laying bricks for a future we both believed in. I didn't see it as paying bills for a girlfriend. I saw it as investing in my future wife. But even the most stable structures have hairline fractures, tiny, almost invisible cracks that don't make noise until the day they give way. In our story, that crack had a name. Leo. Leo was Anna's best friend from college, a title that sounded innocent enough, at least the first dozen times I heard it. He was a graphic designer who liked to call himself an artist, as if that word alone could justify the endless stream of half-finished projects and missed rent payments that seemed to define his life. He was charming in the way that people without responsibility often are. Loose, unbothered, always ready with a smirk and a clever quote about living authentically. I used to tell myself I respected him. After all, everyone needs a dreamer in their orbit to balance the pragmatists. But the truth? I didn't respect Leo. I tolerated him because Anna adored him. He was her ride or die, as she liked to call him. Her platonic soulmate. The guy who was there when her ex, Alex, the musician who broke her heart, left her sobbing on the floor of her college apartment. That backstory made Leo untouchable. Any criticism of him became an attack on her past, on her resilience. So I bit my tongue, again and again. But there was something about Leo that felt corrosive. He had this way of talking that seemed harmless, even funny, until later, when the sting arrived. Little jabs disguised as compliments. "You're lucky, Anna," he'd say. "Jack's the kind of guy who'll keep your calendar color-coded and your taxes paid on time." She'd laugh, I'd smile, but inside, I felt the faint tremor of disrespect. Still, I told myself it was fine. Mature relationships aren't supposed to crumble over insecurity, right? Besides, Anna was loyal. At least that's what I believed. Looking back, I think I confused loyalty with routine. We'd built a life so structured that even discontent had a schedule. Breakfasts, commutes, deadlines, dinners. The machine ran smoothly enough to drown out the noise, but under the hum of everyday life, something was shifting. I began noticing small changes. Her laughter around him had a different pitch, lighter somehow, like it belonged to someone younger, freer. When she talked about Leo, her tone softened in a way that no longer included me, and when I'd question it, she'd roll her eyes and say, "You're overthinking again." "Jack, he's just being Leo." I'd nod, pretending I agreed, even though a part of me, the lawyer part, kept collecting evidence. The way she smiled at her phone late at night, the way his name appeared in stories that didn't need him, the way my house, our house, began to echo with someone else's laughter, even when he wasn't there. And yet, I stayed silent. Because in my profession, silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. You don't jump at the first provocation. You wait, you observe. You let the other side talk themselves into a corner. That's the thing about being a lawyer. You learn patience the way soldiers learn fear, intimately, painfully, and with absolute necessity. So I waited. I told myself that when Leo crossed the line, he'd hand me the rope himself. At the time, I didn't realize that the rope wouldn't just be for him. It would also be the thing that pulled my entire world apart. If there's one universal truth I've learned from both law and love, it's this. Most betrayals don't explode. They unfold, quietly, invisibly, under the guise of normalcy. You don't see the destruction until you're standing in the ruins, wondering when the first crack appeared. And so, in that warm, candlelit house I thought was my refuge, the first fracture deepened. A smile here, a shrug there, a name that lingered too long in conversation. The beginning of the end never announces itself, it just whispers. Leo entered our lives like a song you've heard before, familiar, harmless, but with lyrics that start to sound different the more you listen. He was always around, hovering on the periphery of our weekends, our dinners, our milestones. If Anna was the sunlight of our home, Leo was the shadow that never quite left the room. He was the kind of man people either romanticized or pitied. He called himself a graphic designer, but most of his income came from freelance gigs that barely covered his rent. He lived in an apartment that smelled like acrylic paint and unwashed ambition. Yet, despite the chaos, he had charisma, that intoxicating, effortless kind, the type that makes excuses sound like philosophies. "Not everyone wants to be chained to a desk, Jack," he once said, half laughing, half proclaiming, as he swirled cheap whiskey in his glass. "Some of us would rather live life on our own terms." It wasn't the words that bothered me. It was the way Anna looked at him when he said them. With that old, wistful admiration, reserved for people who seem unburdened by consequence. It's strange how, in love, the qualities you once saw as admirable in someone can slowly morph into insecurity when reflected by another. I could see what Leo represented to her: freedom, spontaneity, the ghost of her college self before the weight of responsibility settled in. And to him, I represented everything he despised: structure, predictability, the dull hum of adulthood. He was clever, I'll give him that. Leo never attacked me outright. Instead, he specialized in subtleties. Those tiny barbs slipped into conversation with surgical precision. If I planned a vacation, he'd mention how spontaneous road trips were so much more real. If I gifted Anna something practical, he'd make a joke about how romance dies somewhere between mortgage payments and car insurance. And every time, Anna would laugh, that small, dismissive laugh that said, "He's harmless. Stop being so serious." But the truth is, death by 1,000 cuts doesn't happen all at once. It's the accumulation of moments like those, the kind that don't bleed, but bruise. In any other context, I might have respected Leo's defiance of convention. There's a place in the world for people who chase art and emotion over stability. But when your art starts to depend on someone else's peace, it stops being noble. It becomes parasitic. There's a cultural irony here, one I didn't appreciate until much later. Society romanticizes the dreamers, the ones who rebel against the grind. But what it doesn't show you is how often those dreamers survive because someone else is doing the grinding. Leo was that kind of man. He wore failure like it was fashion, an emblem of authenticity, while feeding off the people who built the stability he rejected. And Anna, she was blind to it, or maybe she saw it and didn't care. She once told me that Leo reminded her of who she used to be. That should have been my first clue. When someone starts idealizing the past, the present starts to fade. Sometimes she'd come home late from study sessions with Leo, her laughter echoing through the entryway. She'd kiss my cheek absent-mindedly, toss her bag on the couch, and tell me stories that began with, "You'll never believe what Leo said tonight." I'd listen, smile, nod, the perfect patient partner. But inside, I could feel something tightening. Love, I've learned, is a fragile contract built on mutual illusion. You tell yourself you're both looking in the same direction. But the moment one person turns their gaze elsewhere, even slightly, the illusion fractures. Still, I didn't confront her. I kept waiting, hoping that reality would expose what words couldn't. My instinct, the one honed from years in courtrooms, told me to let the evidence accumulate. The truth, after all, has a way of surfacing when people think no one's watching. And I did watch, quietly, patiently. What made it worse was that my friends saw it too. They didn't say it outright, no one ever does, but their glances told the story. At parties, when Leo would monopolize Anna's attention, I'd catch the subtle shifts in body language, the sympathy disguised as politeness. They knew I was being undermined, and I knew they knew. That's the cruelest part of humiliation. It's not always public, but it's always visible. Over time, my patience began to feel less like virtue and more like denial. There's a thin line between giving someone the benefit of the doubt and being the fool who refuses to see the obvious. I walk that line every day. Still, I reminded myself that love isn't about winning. It's about endurance, and I was built to endure. So I waited for the slip, the misstep, the one undeniable moment when all masks fall away. I didn't know when it would come, but I knew it would. And when it did, it came not with violence, but with wine. In a room full of laughter, glasses, and the faint, deceptive warmth of celebration, because betrayal never arrives as a stranger. It sits at your table, drinks your wine, and smiles. It started as a whisper and grew into an ache, that soft, persistent tension between what you know and what you pretend not to see. Leo's presence in our lives had become a kind of background noise, irritating, but constant. You could get used to it if you stopped paying attention, but once you noticed, you couldn't unhear it. The thing about people like Leo is that they don't destroy relationships directly. They corrode them, slowly, patiently. Like humidity in an old house, they slip into every crack you thought was sealed. He had this way of inserting himself into every conversation, every plan, every story. If I mentioned taking Anna somewhere special, Mexico, Italy, anywhere, Leo would find a way to bring up their spontaneous adventures from the past. "Remember that time we camped by the lake in college?" he'd say, laughing. "No plan, no reservations, just pure freedom." Then he'd glance at me, like he was comparing an old photograph to something newer, duller. Anna would blush, smile, say something like, "Oh my God, yes, that was insane." And for a second, I'd feel like a stranger in my own life. It's strange how memory can become a weapon. The past, when wielded by the wrong person, can make the present look like a compromise. Leo wasn't competing with me. Not directly. That would have required self-awareness. He was performing for Anna, yes, but also for himself. Every time he belittled me, he wasn't just attacking me. He was reaffirming his identity. In his world, men like me were the villains, the ones who traded passion for paychecks, dreams for stability, art for law. And yet, when rent was due or his car broke down, it wasn't art that paid for it. It was Anna's household fund, which, of course, came from me. But that irony was lost on her. I used to lie awake at night, watching her sleep beside me, her breathing soft and steady, and wonder when she started believing his version of reality more than mine. There's a kind of loneliness that comes from sleeping next to someone who's drifting away, even while they're still in your arms. You tell yourself you can fix it. You tell yourself it's just a phase. You tell yourself that love is enough, that the years, the shared routines, the plans, they'll anchor her. But love doesn't always anchor. Sometimes it drowns. Looking back, I think the worst part wasn't Leo's words. It was Anna's silence. The way she never defended me. The way she absorbed his digs with a quiet smile, as if they were harmless jokes between friends. But silence, in moments like that, is an answer. She once told me, "You take things too seriously, Jack. He's just joking. You're overreacting, overreacting." That word has ended more relationships than infidelity ever has. Because what it really means is your pain is inconvenient. So, I began to retreat. Not outwardly. Outwardly, I played the same role I always had. Supportive, calm, rational. But inside, I started building walls. It's ironic, really. As a lawyer, I made a living dissecting the truth. But in my own home, I was living a lie I refused to cross-examine. I told myself to wait. I wasn't going to accuse without proof. I'd let Leo hand me the rope, and he would. People like him always do. But while I waited, the poison kept spreading. Every relationship has an ecosystem, a balance of trust, attention, and vulnerability. When an outsider disrupts that balance, it doesn't just affect emotions. It rewires behavior. Anna became more defensive, more distracted. Conversations felt like negotiations. Even her laughter changed. Softer when she was with me, freer when she was with him. I'd walk into a room and feel like I'd interrupted a scene that had been playing before I arrived. There's an invisible cruelty in emotional betrayal. It doesn't scream, it hums. You can go days pretending everything's fine until one small thing, a misplaced text, a lingering look, a tone, brings the entire illusion crashing down. One night, I came home early from work. The house was quiet, except for her laughter from the kitchen. I stopped in the hallway, just listening. Leo was on speakerphone. She was telling him about her day, Something trivial about a professor, I think. And he said, "You sound tired, Annie. You work too hard. You need someone who reminds you to breathe," she giggled. Yeah, maybe. That maybe hit harder than any confession ever could. I didn't say anything. I just stood there in the dark, the weight of it pressing down like humidity before a storm. That's when I realized something. Love doesn't end in a moment. It erodes in whispers. I walked upstairs quietly and looked at the reflection of our bedroom in the window. 2 glasses on the nightstand, 1 untouched. Her laptop still open, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me anymore. I remember thinking, if this were a case, the verdict would already be clear. But it wasn't a case. It was my life, and I wasn't ready to close it, not yet. Because deep down, I knew. The universe has a cruel way of giving you what you need to see, exactly when you've stopped wanting to look. And that moment was coming. Soon. It happened on a night that should have been perfect. One of those rare evenings when everything in your life seems to line up exactly the way you planned. The kind of night you imagine will become a memory you revisit with pride. I had just won the biggest case of my career. 6 brutal months of sleepless nights, missed weekends, and coffee-stained paperwork had finally paid off. My firm was buzzing with congratulations, my name being whispered in rooms I'd only ever hoped to enter. It was supposed to be my moment. To celebrate, I decided to host a dinner party. I wanted my friends there, the ones who'd barely seen me through the chaos. And of course, Anna. It wasn't just a party. It was proof that the sacrifices had meant something, that all the hours I spent away from her were building towards something solid, something we could both be proud of. I opened the old bottle of Bordeaux I'd been saving since the day I passed the bar. The house smelled of roasted lamb, garlic, and candle wax. Laughter filled the air, a warm, civilized hum that only comes when people feel safe. The table was set perfectly. Polished silver, linen napkins, the kind of details that tell the world, this is a life under control. And then, of course, Leo arrived. He walked in late, as if he were stepping onto a stage rather than into someone else's home. He carried a cheap bottle of red wine, the kind that stains your lips purple, and wore that infuriatingly casual grin that said, "Rules are for other people." Anna greeted him with a hug that lasted a second too long. Not inappropriate, but long enough for me to notice. He was polite, charming even. Everyone has that one friend who can make a room revolve around him without trying. Leo was that person, and he knew it. He had that artist's confidence, the smug self-assurance of someone who believes passion excuses irresponsibility. Dinner began smoothly enough. For a while, I almost forgot he was there. The conversation flowed, the food was good, and the wine was working its quiet magic. But as the night went on, I could feel Leo's presence growing louder. Not in volume, but in intent. He started on some tangent about an art exhibit, something about how real creativity was dying in a world obsessed with money and status. It was thinly veiled, but everyone at the table knew who the target was. I didn't rise to it. I'd dealt with worse provocations from better men in the courtroom. I smiled, took a slow sip of wine, and waited for him to tire himself out. But he didn't. "It's just different ways of seeing the world," Leo said finally, looking straight at me. "Some of us are driven by art, others by practicality." It was a performance, and I was the unwilling audience. Anna gave him a warning look, one of those subtle social cues that says stop before you embarrass me, but Leo ignored it. He turned to her with a faux gentle expression that made my stomach tighten. "I just hope you're happy, Anna," he said, his voice dripping with sincerity so fake it should have been bottled and sold as irony. "Jack's a great guy. Stable, reliable." He said reliable like it was a disease. "But you could do way better." The table went silent. You could have heard the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. My friends froze, forks suspended, wine glasses halfway to their mouths. Anna's face flushed a deep crimson. She looked down at her plate, mortified. That was the moment the lens snapped into focus. The moment I saw it all, the manipulations, the subtle digs, the smug superiority, lined up like evidence waiting to be submitted in court. The lawyer in me woke up. I set my utensils down carefully, the faint clink echoing in the silence. Then I folded my hands on the table and looked directly at Leo. The smile was gone. The warmth drained from the room like air from a punctured lung. "That's a bold claim, Leo," I said softly. almost conversationally. I'm interested in your reasoning. What does a better man for Anna look like? Please, be specific, he blinked. That wasn't the response he expected. He was prepared for outrage, maybe a curse or a slammed fist, not a cross-examination. Well, he stammered, someone who gets her, someone creative. On her level, you know. I see, I said, nodding slightly. So the main qualification for being better is being creative. An interesting theory. I leaned back, still calm. And you, I assume, see yourself as the benchmark. He smirked, recovering some confidence. I think I understand her better than anyone. Perfect, I said. Then let's examine that. Let's talk about something measurable. Investment, for instance. The air grew thick. My friends exchanged uneasy glances. But I wasn't done. I was in full control. Not angry, not emotional. Just precise. Anna's in her second year of law school. A top-tier program. I'm paying for it. The tuition, the living expenses, everything. It's an investment not just of money, but of faith. Faith in her and in our future. So tell me, Leo, what have you invested in her future, other than your opinions of me? His smirk faltered. Anna looked up sharply. Jack, don't do this, she whispered. I held up a hand without looking at her. I'm not done. Let's talk about her car. Safe. Reliable. I bought it for her. You have a car too, don't you, Leo? The convertible that's always in the shop. Funny, I hear she's lent you money for repairs. 3 times, wasn't it? From our household account, the one I fund. So in a way, I suppose I'm not just supporting Anna's education. I'm also subsidizing your little adventures. You're welcome. A few stifled laughs around the table. Leo's face turned pale. And finally, I continued, my voice low and steady. This house, the roof over her head, I own it. I pay the mortgage. I fix what breaks. You, on the other hand, can't even keep up with rent. So let me summarize for the table. You believe a man who provides stability, security, and opportunity is inferior to one who drains her financially and emotionally, and calls it art. Is that correct? Silence. Leo's lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked like a man stripped bare in front of a jury. I leaned back, exhaled slowly, and said, Objection, overruled. The room remained frozen, the hum of tension almost physical. I had won. Everyone knew it. Everyone except Anna. Her chair scraped violently against the floor as she stood, her hands trembling, eyes blazing. I can't believe you just did that, she hissed. You humiliated him in front of everyone. He humiliated himself, I replied quietly. I just presented the evidence. Her voice cracked like a whip. Apologize. Right now, or we're over. And there it was, the ultimatum. The verdict I hadn't realized was coming. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the woman I loved, but a stranger standing in the wreckage of something we both built. Then I smiled. Just once, a small, tired smile, and I said nothing. Silence. That's what I remember most. Not the yelling, not the clatter of plates, not even the way Anna stormed out. Just silence. The kind that doesn't fill a room so much as swallow it. After she left, my guests sat frozen, unsure if they should comfort me or congratulate me for finally saying what everyone had been thinking for months. One by one, they excused themselves, muttering half-hearted apologies. You did what you had to do. She'll come around. He had it coming. I didn't respond. I just started clearing the table. It's strange. The things you do automatically when your life begins to fall apart. You stack plates. You rinse glasses. You wipe down surfaces that were perfectly clean to begin with. It's like your hands need something to do, so your mind doesn't implode. Leo left without a word. I didn't see him go. I just heard the door close and the faint crunch of gravel as his cheap sneakers retreated down the driveway. When I finally sat down, the chair across from me was empty, the candle still burning low between the half-finished wine glasses. I stared at the flame until it collapsed into itself, a quiet, flickering surrender. That was the last night Anna ever slept in our house. She came back the next morning to pack. No explanations, no apologies, just cold efficiency. She moved through the house like a tenant collecting her deposit. I tried to speak once. Anna. But she didn't even look up. The moment she closed the door behind her, I realized how loud a house can be when it's empty. At first, I thought I'd feel anger. That was what I was supposed to feel, wasn't it? But it never came. What came instead was clarity, that razor-sharp calm that arrives when the worst has already happened, and all that's left is truth. Love, I learned, doesn't die in betrayal. It dies in indifference. For weeks, I went through the motions. Work, gym, late-night drives with no destination. Friends checked in, colleagues offered distractions, but none of it mattered. The house had become a museum of conversations that used to mean something. Her coffee mug still sat by the sink, a hair tie on the bathroom counter. Little ghosts of her. Proof that she was real once, but no longer mine. I thought about Leo more than I should have, not out of jealousy, but curiosity. Men like him rarely win, but they never disappear either. They drift, always finding someone new to believe in their myth. I imagined him and Anna together for a time. She'd romanticize his chaos, mistake it for freedom. He'd love her attention until it became responsibility. Then he'd resent it. Then he'd leave. They always do, and she'd learn, too late, that freedom isn't the same as peace. I didn't take satisfaction in that thought, only inevitability. Some lessons can't be taught. They have to be survived. Months passed, the house grew quieter, and I grew comfortable in the quiet. There's a strange dignity in solitude, when you stop needing to prove you were right. One night, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Jack? Her voice, softer than I remembered. Hi. There was a pause, the kind that carries all the words neither person wants to say. I'm sorry, she finally whispered. You didn't deserve how I treated you. I closed my eyes, let the words hang there for a moment. No, I said, but you did what you needed to. She laughed weakly. You sound different. I am. Another pause. Then, I thought I wanted something else. I thought he understood me, but it turns out he just liked being needed. Most people do, I said. She didn't respond. Jack, she said finally, could we? No, I interrupted gently. We can't. Not out of cruelty, out of mercy. Because some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt after. She hung up. I sat there for a long time, phone still in my hand, listening to the echo of a goodbye that had really happened months before. It wasn't closure. It was confirmation. And in that quiet, I realized something else. Something I hadn't been ready to admit until then. I hadn't lost her to Leo. I'd lost her to herself. And maybe that was always the point. So I poured myself a glass of that same Bordeaux, the one we never finished that night, and raised it, not to her, not to him, but to the silence that had finally become peace. Because sometimes the only way to win is to stop playing. There's a saying in law, you can't rebuild on contaminated ground. Before you construct anything new, you have to clear the debris, cleanse the soil, and make sure what stood before won't poison what comes next. That became my life philosophy after Anna. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I didn't date. I didn't chase distractions. I rebuilt. It started small. The house, once a shared dream, had become a ghost of everything lost. So I made it mine again. I stripped the bedroom of her floral prints, repainted the walls a clean slate grey. I replaced the kitchen table, the same one where Leo had sat smirking, with a solid oak one I built myself. No more ghosts, no more shared memories, just clean wood and honest work. It's strange. Rebuilding a house teaches you more about rebuilding yourself than therapy ever could. Every nail you drive is a choice, rebuild or resent. I chose rebuild. At work, I was sharper than ever. Winning cases came easier. Maybe because personal heartbreak teaches you to read people better. You start to see the cracks in their stories, the patterns in their lies. I became a better lawyer because I had lived through the most ruthless cross-examination of all. Love. But even as I rose professionally, I noticed something different about the world around me. Maybe it was always there, and I'd just been too content to see it. The quiet discontent in marriages that looked perfect from the outside. The way colleagues avoided eye contact when their spouses called. The statistics started haunting me. divorce rates hovering around 45%, infidelity studies showing over half of people admit to emotional cheating. It wasn't just my story. It was a cultural epidemic, people confusing excitement for connection, novelty for truth. We were all chasing dopamine instead of devotion. One evening, about 6 months after Anna left, I was invited to speak at a university, a lecture on ethics in modern law. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stood in front of students with bright eyes and bigger ambitions, and for the first time I spoke not as an attorney, but as a man who'd learned the hard way that justice doesn't stop at the courtroom door. Contracts, I told them, are not about punishment. They're about trust. Once that trust is broken, it doesn't matter how perfect the paperwork is. It's void. Somewhere in the back row, a young woman raised her hand. So you're saying relationships are contracts too? I smiled. They're the oldest kind of contract. But the terms aren't written in ink. They're written in behavior. After the lecture, that same student came up to thank me. She said she'd just gotten out of a toxic relationship and that my words hit hard. Her name was Claire. Sharp, witty, a journalism major with a habit of seeing truth where others saw noise. We started having coffee. Just coffee at first, but those talks turned into walks, and those walks turned into something quieter, steadier. Not love, not yet, but something that looked a lot like peace. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't performing. I wasn't defending or explaining myself. I was just being. She'd ask me questions no one else had the courage to. Do you ever miss her? Yes, I said. But missing someone doesn't mean you want them back. It just means you remember what it felt like to believe. Claire nodded, as if she understood perfectly. Maybe she did. As months turned into a year, life started to feel like something I could trust again. I found new hobbies: woodworking, hiking, volunteering at a legal aid clinic. It wasn't about replacing what I'd lost. It was about rediscovering who I'd been before. Love became litigation. But there's always one. Final test life gives you, and the cross-examination that decides whether you've truly healed or just rehearsed healing. Mine came one afternoon when I received a letter. No return address. Just my name in handwriting I could never forget. Anna. Inside was a single page. Jack, I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say you were right. About everything. Leo's gone. Law school is over. I'm trying to rebuild, but it's harder than I thought. I used to think strength was independence. Now I think it's accountability. You once told me actions have consequences. I understand that now. I hope life has been kinder to you than I was. Anna. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. I didn't reply. Not because I was bitter, but because the case was closed. The verdict final, and reopening it would serve no one. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, the same kind I'd poured that fateful night. The difference was this time, I wasn't alone. Claire sat beside me, her laughter soft, her presence calm. The sky turned the colour of embers. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking back. Rebuilding, I realised, isn't about replacing the past. It's about reclaiming the part of yourself you gave away, and I had finally done it. Time has a strange way of dulling even the sharpest memories. It doesn't erase them. It just sands down the edges until you can hold them without bleeding. 3 years had passed since that dinner, the trial that ended a love story. By then, my life had found its rhythm. The house, once haunted by her, now carried laughter again. Claire and I had built something slow, deliberate, and honest. A relationship without theatrics, without ultimatums. I'd stopped waiting for ghosts to return, and then, one afternoon, she did. It was a Sunday. I'd just come back from a run when I saw a car parked outside the house. An old silver sedan with faded paint and a bumper held together by tape. She stepped out, dressed simply in jeans and a blazer that had seen better days. Anna. For a moment, I couldn't move. It was like seeing a photograph come to life. Familiar, but wrong. Colours faded. Expression different. She wasn't the same woman who had left in fury. She was quieter now, smaller somehow. "Hi, Jack," she said, voice steady but tired. I just nodded. "Anna." She glanced around the yard, taking in the changes, the new porch railing, the flower beds, the calm. "You've been busy," she said softly. "Yeah," I replied. "Had to be." We stood there, in the kind of silence that carries years of words unsaid. Finally, she sighed. "Can we talk?" I hesitated. then gestured toward the porch. 5 minutes. She smiled faintly, grateful even for that. When she sat down, I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she held the cup of water I offered. The confident paralegal who'd once sparred with me over philosophy and politics was gone. What sat before me was a woman who'd lived through her own cross-examination and lost. "I owe you an apology," she began, "but I know it's late." I didn't say anything. She looked out toward the yard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Leo's gone. Moved to Portland with someone else. He left a note, just a note. Said he needed to find himself. Funny, right? That's what he always said when he wanted to avoid accountability." I stayed silent. She laughed softly. Not bitterly, just sadly. "I dropped out of law school. Couldn't afford to finish after you pulled the funding. I took jobs here and there, legal assistant, temp work. But every time I sat in a courtroom, I thought about you. How you handled people, how you handled truth." I could feel the weight behind her words. She wasn't here to justify herself. She was here because she finally understood the cost of her choices. "I used to tell myself you were cruel," she said, eyes glistening, "that you destroyed my future out of spite. But you didn't, did you? You just stopped building it for me." That hit me harder than I expected, because it was true. "I learned something the hard way," she continued. "Love isn't about who excites you. It's about who shows up, who keeps showing up, even when it's boring, even when it's hard. And I threw that away because I mistook stability for control." She turned to look at me, eyes wet but steady. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I see it now. Everything." For a moment, the years between us collapsed, not in a romantic way, but in a profoundly human one. I saw not the woman who betrayed me, but the one who had once been trying, failing, and learning, just like I was. I finally spoke. "We were both young. You wanted freedom. I wanted certainty. Maybe we were both wrong." She nodded. "Maybe. But I'll tell you something, Jack. Certainty might be overrated, but you gave me safety. And I've learned that's the rarest kind of love." The wind picked up, rustling the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's dog barked. The world was moving on, as it always does. She stood up, brushed her hair from her face, and gave me a look that carried both regret and peace. "You look happy," she said. "I am," I replied simply. "I'm glad," she whispered. "You deserve that." She turned to go, then hesitated. "Do you ever think about, what if?" I smiled faintly. "Sometimes, but I think we both know we'd end up right back here, just older." She laughed quietly, tears still on her cheeks. "Yeah, probably." As she walked to her car, I didn't stop her. I didn't watch her leave this time. I just sat there, listening to the gravel crunch beneath her tires. The same sound as that night years ago, but softer somehow. When the silence returned, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Later, when Claire came home, she found me still on the porch. She asked if everything was okay. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Just finished a conversation that was 3 years overdue." She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. She just took my hand, and for the first time in my life, I realized something powerful. Closure isn't something you wait for. It's something you decide to give yourself. Some people think closure comes with a conversation, a final apology, a clear ending. But for me, it came with stillness. Not forgiveness, not anger, just stillness. That quiet space where the noise of the past finally loses its power. After Anna left that day, I didn't replay our words or wonder if I should have said more. I just sat there as the evening light turned golden, watching shadows stretch across the porch. The air smelled like rain and cedar, and for the first time in years, I felt unburdened. The thing about pain is, it changes its shape over time. In the beginning, it's sharp. You feel it every second, in every breath. Then it becomes dull, lingering somewhere between memory and lesson. But if you let it, if you learn to live with it, pain eventually becomes wisdom. And wisdom is the most expensive thing any of us will ever own. In my career, I've seen people destroy each other for far less than love. Business partners, families, even lifelong friends, all unraveling over betrayal, money, pride. I used to think justice was about punishment, about making the guilty pay. But after Anna, I started to see it differently. Justice isn't retribution. It's balance. It's the restoration of truth after chaos. Love, in its purest form, is the same. When it's right, it's not about keeping score. It's about trust. The quiet confidence that someone's on your side, even when you're both wrong sometimes. But when that trust is broken, When one person starts building walls instead of bridges, the whole structure collapses. That was what I finally understood. Love isn't a promise of permanence. It's a contract of mutual honesty. In court, we call that good faith. In life, we call it loyalty. Months passed. Claire and I grew stronger. Not because we were perfect, but because we were transparent. She'd seen the worst in me, the bitterness, the detachment, and stayed anyway, not to fix me, but to witness my rebuilding. That's how you know someone truly cares. They don't rescue you, they rebuild with you. One evening, I got an email from a law journal requesting an essay for their upcoming feature, Justice in the Modern Age. I almost declined. Too busy, I told myself. But something in me knew this was the right time to say what I'd learned. So I wrote, not about statutes or precedents, but about people. About how law at its core isn't about punishment, but about truth with consequences. And how the same principle applies to love. When we say, "I'm done," I wrote, what we really mean is, I've reached the point where my investment no longer yields integrity. Ending something isn't cruelty. It's acknowledging imbalance. We are all builders of invisible contracts, bound by trust. Some people honor those contracts, others exploit them. But in the end, justice, like love, always restores itself. One way or another, the essay went viral. Colleagues reached out. Students quoted it. I got letters from strangers, people who'd lived through their own emotional trials. One woman wrote, "You made me see that leaving isn't weakness, it's self-respect." Another said, "You helped me forgive someone who never said sorry." That was when I realized, maybe what happened with Anna wasn't just my story. Maybe it was everyone's story, in different forms. The trial, the betrayal, the verdict. We all go through them, whether in love, work, or friendship. And if there's one truth that outlasts every heartbreak, it's this: closure doesn't come when someone else apologizes. It comes when you stop needing them to. I often think about that night. The dinner, the silence, the moment she said, "Apologize, or we're over." Back then, I thought it was the worst night of my life. Now I know it was the beginning of everything that made me who I am, because being done isn't about vengeance or pride. It's about choosing peace over proof. The past, I've learned, doesn't disappear. It just settles into you, like sediment at the bottom of a glass. You don't forget it. You just stop stirring it. Tonight, as I sit on the porch, Claire's hand resting in mine, I realize I've won the only case that ever truly mattered. The case for my own peace. No judge, no jury, no closing argument, just a quiet verdict. I'm free. And that, I think, is what done really means. It's been 12 years since that night. The night the story of us ended and the story of me began. I've grown older, slower in some ways, gentler in others. My hair's gone grey around the temples and my hands carry that faint tremor that comes with time. But my mind has never been clearer. I still live in the same house. The porch creaks a little more now. The paint has faded, and the oak tree in the yard has grown wide enough to cast its own kind of mercy. The world outside feels different, quieter. Maybe because I've stopped fighting it. Claire and I never married, not because we didn't believe in it, but because we didn't need to. We built something that didn't require vows to prove its strength. We chose each other every day, without ceremony, and that choice became its own sacred ritual. Sometimes, late in the evening, I reread the essay that started it all, Justice in the Modern Age. It's now part of university syllabi, quoted by professors and passed around by students who've never met me. Funny thing, immortality, it often comes disguised as understanding. But what still surprises me is how many people wrote to say that essay helped them through heartbreak, betrayal, divorce, grief. It's as if the courtroom of love is universal. We've all stood in it, trying to explain why we did what we did, hoping the sentence will be kind. Anna wrote me once, a short letter. No apology, no regret, just a simple truth. I finally found peace. Jack, not the kind you find with someone, the kind you build after everyone's gone. I smiled when I read it, because that's the only peace that lasts. There's a point in every life when you stop wanting to rewrite the past. You stop thinking of the what-ifs and almosts, and you start seeing the beauty in what actually happened. The messy, human, imperfect truth. Because that's what shapes you, not the moments that went right, but the ones that shattered you into something wiser. People sometimes ask me now, if you could go back, would you change anything? And I always say, no, not a word, not a wound, because love, the real kind, doesn't just teach you how to hold someone, it teaches you how to let go without losing yourself. The sun is setting as I write this. Claire is reading in the garden. The air smells faintly of rain and mint, and there's a kind of silence that feels earned, not empty. I've stopped waiting for redemption. I've stopped chasing explanations. I've learned that being done doesn't mean ending something. It means completing it. And completion is the rarest kind of peace. When I finally close my notebook, I look out at the horizon, that long, quiet line where day meets night, and I whisper the same 3 words that began this whole journey. I'm done. But this time, it's not defiance, it's acceptance.